Morning everyone, thanks for watching. Hope you're doing well. I'm making breakfast and I'd like to, while this cooks, walk around and point out some things that I've learned from digging swales these last 2 years. Behind me, these were dug last spring, and then across the stream in the smaller field are some swales that I dug this year. So let's get started. What we're looking at here was a month ago submerged in water. Those logs you see were completely underwater, and there were lots of frogs in here breeding and laying eggs, and tadpoles hatched a couple days after the eggs were laid. And even though it rained yesterday, and we've got rain this week, it slowly dried out. And I was hoping that there'd be a small puddle here, but what I should have done is created a sort of a pocket or an even deeper part of the swale where hopefully water would remain even when the rest is dry. That way tadpoles and amphibious life has a place to retreat to, because when this dried out, all the tadpoles dried out too. So yeah, instead of making it just uniformly shaped, it might be something to try would be to create one or two deeper bowls. These seasonally submerged areas. Another thing I wanted to point out is the slope here is way too steep. I don't like that shape at all. You would much prefer something gradual and wide that slopes slowly, but this is more of a volcano type shape. It goes straight up and then falls off on the backside. Because there's rye there holding it, it shouldn't erode, but even here you can see some signs of it eroding. This is where we dug the very first swales. And so this is one of the first ones we dug last year before we had a whole lot of experience. And that's how you learn. This was all underwater, this entire swale, until a few days ago. You'll notice the dried out algae or duckweed on the surface. And over here, there's still quite a bit of water. And this is kind of what I'm talking about with creating a permanent water area. Or if not permanent, at least it's deep enough for tadpoles to grow up and become frogs. I guess it'd be called a vernal pond, a spring pond. It's pretty overtaken with green algae here. I wonder if some of that is from excess nitrogen and stuff still in this field leaching in, or yeah. In here I planted some water lotus and some arrowhead this year, just some seeds, so we'll see if any of those grow. Cattails would do well here, rushes. You'll notice the grass here is doing really well. And this is an area that wasn't submerged At least not very much. It's still, it looks like it, actually it was, but it wasn't, this isn't a very deep swale. And so if what you want is pasture all the way up to the edge of your swale or grass, you definitely want to make it shallower like this so you don't have extremely submerged plants. You also notice that there's not tree tubes on every tree. In fact, the majority of trees don't have tubes here. So it's also part of an experiment to see how the tree tubes affect the trees. In a couple years, I'll be able to compare those that had tubes and those that didn't. And that'll be really helpful. That's where we started, at the north end, and then after a week of excavating, we started to work our way this way. This was all last year, obviously. And this swale is starting to look better. I cut it shallower and wider and mounded it shallower and wider as well. So you get better as the week goes on, but if you're doing these and you run an excavator for a week, make sure you focus at the beginning on the shape of your swale. It can be hard to think about that because you're just thinking about how does this machine work. This, you'll notice, is planted differently. And I can't tell you exactly what these are until they flower. Oh, there's my neighbor Larry. You heard the honk. Actually, Larry might be watching this, so hi Larry, if you are. That was you. These are wildflowers, and I mixed it with something else. I can't quite remember now. I think it was Indian grass and big blue stem, which was cool because these are natives and they're going to add a lot of diversity, especially insect diversity, and we'll get a lot of good interactions going on here. But you notice the side of it is eroding, and that's the one drawback to using perennials and wildflowers and plants and grasses like that are slow to establish. Even our native grasses, big blue stem and switchgrass and Indian grass and side oats, are all slow to establish, unlike rye. And now if the slope here were really gradual, it probably wouldn't be as big of a problem. Although this isn't that bad of a slope. But one thing you could do, and I would recommend doing, is using something quick and cheap on the sides, like ryegrass, to scatter it on the slopes, especially on the downhill slope. And you could even do it on the inside as well. And then on top, that's where you could experiment with perennials and wildflowers and some different natives, and without having to worry about erosion. And you'll notice that actually some of this stuff these stalks here are annuals that I also seeded last year. I think I seeded a mixture of buckwheat and field peas and oats, just to see how it would do. Sort of as a cover crop, you might say, or a green manure. And it'll hold it for 1 year, but then the plants die because they're all annuals. Right here, there's not a whole lot. So this spring I planted some clover and some chicory. Not great things to plant, but we need to get some roots in there. Now down here in the berm, the wildflower mix did really well. So it'll be fun to see what this starts to look like. I didn't see a whole lot of flowers last year, but that was the first year, and a lot of these flowers won't bloom until the second, third years and onward. Right here, there's a pretty bad spot, pretty eroded spot. Yeah. And then just past that, well, just about here is where I went back to rye, and you'll notice how thick and lush that is and how well it's holding. There's no erosion problems here. And you also notice, if you watched the post downpours video that I posted from last year, that these are dry now. And we've even had rain this week. More rain's coming this weekend. Now it's definitely moist down in there, and there was water early this spring. That's when we seem to always have water, is in early spring. But these aren't permanent wetlands like some people may have thought, or rivers or anything. They will just be seasonally holding water. There's quite a bit of this stuff creeping up here. A lot of what you see is not anything I planted. These are just weeds that have come in. Now these are, and I couldn't tell you what those are until I see a flower. We're all the way on the other end of the field, on the south end. And it also faces south. And because it faces south, I decided to plant fruit trees here. And just got these in a couple weeks ago. Here's a plum, Japanese plum. I think I have a total of 22 fruit trees here. 1, 2, 3 here. 2 more on this swale. And there's plums, European pears, peaches, and 2 apricots. Yeah, these swales are a little bit different. They're shorter. They're the last ones I excavated, so the shape on them is a lot better. Shallower, a little wider. Still not perfect, but haven't had too much erosion problems here, even though, as you'll notice, I didn't even get any seeds down. Well, I guess that's not true. Here it looks like some of the wildflowers that I planted. But there's not a whole lot of growth on them yet, and I still haven't had erosion problems. Although this that's popping up should be clover and bird's foot trefoil that I planted this year. And all along these are fruiting shrubs. There's no trees here. There's aronia berry. Right here's elder. There's false locust, I think, or river locust. There's another plum. There's strawberries here, and the strawberries are doing well, which is good to see. Here's honeyberry, and you'll notice, I think this is the only one hanging on for dear life. When they were shipped to me, they came from Washington, and they were completely green when they arrived, which isn't a good sign. You want them to be still dormant. and they didn't do so well when I transplanted them. And these right here, I put cuttings. I think that's willow cuttings. There's currant cuttings in here. There's also honeyberry cuttings. From what I've read, that's the most water-loving tree is a honeyberry. It can withstand submerged roots. Water-loving shrub, I should say. It's a fruiting shrub. There's another strawberry, which is cool to see that that's another option for ground cover is strawberries. Elder, comfrey, there's a currant that I planted last year. Here are two big comfrey plants. Another fruit tree. Is that what is this one? Rosy Gage. I think that's a plum, a European plum. More strawberries, willow. Yeah, so I planted everything here. And in the next couple of years, this should look way different. And hopefully, we should be harvesting fruit here. Now there's one here down at the very edge by my neighbors. Well, two, I guess. This side and this side. That hold quite a bit of water yet. And you'll notice right there, tadpoles. I don't know if it shows up on the camera, but there's a lot of tadpoles. Wow, the water's absolutely thick with tadpoles. That's why it looks black. And that's great to see. That's what wasn't happening. That's why you want the ditches not to dry out if you choose to have wet ditches. If you don't, you could make them really, really shallow and make the berm shallow. That way you can have grass or pasture or wildflowers all the way up to your trees. But if you choose to, and you want these to be seasonally wet, it's a good idea if you can make sure they don't dry out in the spring. Make them deep enough so they won't dry out. Now these aren't that deep. They're just closer to the water table, I suppose, or we're a little lower in the landscape. So that's cool. And those frogs will do a wonder keeping the insects down in the summer. And they'll definitely reduce pest pressure on the trees. And they'll also attract things that like to hunt frogs, snakes, raccoons, foxes, and those in turn will help keep the mice and the rabbits down as well. Yeah, this is laying wet too. Here's a yellow birch I planted here, a water-loving tree. Willow, aronia, comfrey, currant, elder. Elder loves water. Honeyberry likes water. Willow, obviously. Plum. This would be a great place for wild plum. Anyway, I'll probably stop the video here because it could go on for an hour. Now I want to take you across the field and show you the most recent swales I dug.